The wind off the Coronado tide flats carried the smell of salt, diesel, and burned coffee, and the morning sun had not yet softened the steel-gray water when the laughter began. It was the kind of laughter men used like a weapon, low and certain, the kind that did not need to be loud to cut. She stood at the edge of the gravel lot in clean utilities, her boots already dusted from the walk-in, a single black duffel at her feet. Her name tape read Hollister. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She did not smile, and she did not look away when the three operators by the Humvee glanced at her and then at each other. One of them, broad-shouldered, sun-bleached, with the easy posture of a man who had never been told no, leaned against the hood and said something the others found very funny. The phrase carried just enough to reach her. "Who is she? What is she doing on our beach?" She did not answer. She had learned, a long time ago, that some questions were not really questions. They were tests dressed up as jokes, and the only correct response was silence and work. What none of them knew yet was that in 72 hours, one of those three men would be bleeding out in a stairwell in a country none of them were supposed to be in. And the only person in radio range who could keep him alive would be the woman they had just laughed at. Have you ever watched someone be underestimated, and quietly known the room was about to be wrong about everything? Stay with this story. You are about to meet her. Her name was Claire Hollister, and she was 31 years old the morning she walked onto that gravel lot in Coronado. She had grown up in a small farming town in eastern Montana, the kind of place where the wind never really stopped and where the nearest hospital was 40 minutes by truck on a good day. Her father had been a Navy corpsman in his younger years, then a volunteer fire chief, then a man who taught his daughter how to splint a calf's leg before she was old enough to ride a bike. Her mother had been a schoolteacher with chapped hands and a quiet faith. She had also been the one to die first, of a cancer that came fast and left slowly, when Claire was 14. After that, the house had grown quiet in the way only grieving houses do, and Claire had learned to fill silence with usefulness. She fixed fences. She brought her father coffee. She studied late. She had enlisted at 19, not out of patriotism alone, but because she wanted to be the person who arrived when something went wrong. She trained as a Navy hospital corpsman. She was good at it. Not flashy. Not loud. Just good in the way her father had been good, with steady hands and a memory for faces and a refusal to panic when other people were screaming. She had served 2 deployments with a Marine infantry unit, the first to a dusty valley in Helmand, the second to a string of small bases along a contested border. She had treated burns, gunshot wounds, infections, heat stroke, and one 19-year-old lance corporal who had cried for his mother while she held pressure on a femoral bleed. He had lived. Many had not. She did not talk about either group. By the time she earned her selection to attempt the pipeline for Special Operations Independent Duty Corpsman, the rare path that placed a corpsman alongside SEAL teams in the field, she had been told no in 17 different ways by 17 different men. None of those men had ever met her father. None of them had ever watched her tie a tourniquet in the dark while a man bucked underneath her hands. She did not argue with any of them. She simply kept showing up, kept passing the screenings, kept running the times. She was not the fastest swimmer in her workup class. She was not the strongest on the ropes. But she was the one who, when the instructor stacked failure on top of failure, did not flinch and did not quit. She had been told, more than once, that she did not belong. She had nodded politely and gone back to work. Belonging, in her experience, was something you earned in silence. You did not announce it. You let the work speak, and you let the men who needed to learn at their own pace. Now she was standing on a gravel lot in Coronado, watching 3 SEALs laugh at her, and she understood with perfect clarity that the lesson was about to begin again. The man who eventually walked across the lot to meet her was a Master Chief named Daniel Reeve. He was in his late 40s, with a face that had been weathered by 26 years of saltwater and bad decisions made by other people. He did not laugh. He did not smile either. He simply looked at her, and at the 3 men by the Humvee, and the laughter died on its own. He introduced himself with one short sentence and told her to follow him. He did not offer to carry her duffel, which she appreciated. She had learned long ago that the men who insisted on carrying things for her were usually the same men who later resented her for being there. The team she was being attached to was preparing for a short-notice deployment to a coastal region in West Africa, where a small American advisory element was working with a partner force against a network of armed traffickers. The mission was officially listed as training and support. Unofficially, everyone knew the line between training and direct action had been thinning for months. The platoon was called Bravo Element. There were 16 operators, plus a small support cell. Claire was the only woman and the only corpsman attached at that level. Her job was simple to describe and almost impossible to do. She was to keep them alive. All of them. Including the ones who did not want her there. The 3 men from the lot were named Voss, Aldrin, and Trent. Voss was the broad-shouldered one with the easy posture. Aldrin was quieter, leaner, with a habit of watching people too long. Trent was the youngest, maybe 26, with a quick mouth and a quicker temper. They were good operators. Their files said so, and the way they moved said so too. They had also lost their last corpsman, a man named Hayes, on a rooftop in another country 11 months earlier. No one spoke his name out loud. Claire learned about him the way you learn about ghosts, in pauses, in the way a door closed too hard when she asked the wrong question. She did not take their coldness personally. She understood it. They were not rejecting her. They were protecting themselves from caring about another medic who might not come home. It was not fair to her, but fairness, she had decided years ago, was a civilian concept. She spent the first 3 days on base doing what she always did. She memorized every man's medical history. She learned which one had a bad knee, which one had a sulfur allergy, which one carried a photograph of a daughter in his plate carrier, and which one had a wife who had stopped writing back. She labeled her aid bag with her own handwriting. She checked it 3 times each night, and once more before sleep. She did not try to make friends. She tried to make herself useful, and then invisible, in that exact order. The laughter did not stop entirely. But it began to lose its edge, the way a knife dulls against work it cannot cut. They flew out on a Wednesday at 3 in the morning, in the belly of a transport plane that smelled of hydraulic fluid and old sweat. Claire sat against the bulkhead with her aid bag between her boots and a paperback she did not open in her hand. Across from her, Trent slept with his mouth open. Voss stared at the deck plates without blinking. Aldrin watched her, and for the first time, he did not look away when she looked back. The forward operating site was a cluster of low concrete buildings inside a partner nation military compound, ringed by sandbags and concertina wire and the slow, watchful eyes of a sentry detachment that did not entirely trust the Americans they were protecting. The heat outside the aircraft hit her like a hand. The humidity was worse. Within an hour her uniform was soaked through and her hair had given up. The first week was rehearsal. They worked with the partner force on close-quarters drills, on vehicle interdiction, on how to move quietly through the narrow stairwells of buildings that had not been built with quiet movement in mind. Claire moved with them. She was not there to shoot. She was there to be where the bleeding would be, and so she trained on stack positions, on how to step over a man on the floor without losing her footing, on how to keep one hand free at all times. She also, every evening, ran a quiet aid station out of a converted storage room. She treated the partner force soldiers for blisters, infections, a tooth that should have come out 3 years ago. She did it without being asked. By the end of the first week, the partner force commander, a sergeant major named Diallo with grey at his temples and a slow, careful English, had begun to call her doctor, even though she corrected him every time. The Americans noticed. Voss noticed in particular. He did not say anything. But the laughter from the gravel lot did not follow her into the compound, and Trent had started, almost grudgingly, to ask her opinion about a rash on his forearm. On the 9th day, the mission changed. Intelligence came through that a high-value target, a trafficker who had been linked to the deaths of 2 partner force soldiers and rumored to be holding a Western aid worker, was sleeping in a 3-story building near the coast. The decision was made fast. Bravo element would move that night, with a small element of Diallo's men, to enter the building, recover the hostage if she was there, and detain or neutralize the target. The briefing was short and clean. Claire's position was with the assault element, 2 doors back from the breach, ready to push forward the moment any operator went down. She would carry her aid bag, a sidearm, and a short carbine she hoped not to use. Master Chief Reeve looked at her once during the briefing, a long look, and gave a single nod. It was not approval. It was acknowledgement. In his world, those were the same thing. She did not sleep that night. She checked her bag 4 times instead of 3. They moved at 2300, in 3 low-profile vehicles that rolled with their headlights off through streets that smelled of fish and burning trash. The coastal town was quiet in the way places get quiet when the people who live there have learned not to look out their windows after dark. Claire sat third from the front in the second vehicle, her knee pressed against Aldrin's, her breath slow and measured. The building was a narrow concrete structure squeezed between 2 others, with a single front entrance, a back alley exit, and a rooftop accessible by an interior stairwell. The plan was clean. Voss and his team would breach the front. A second element would block the alley. A third would hold the rooftop after a fast climb up the adjacent building. The hostage, if she was alive, was believed to be on the 2nd floor. The breach went well. The first 30 seconds always do. The lead element flowed through the front door in a tight stack, weapons up, voices low. Claire moved in behind them, 2 paces back from Aldrin, her eyes already scanning for what she always scanned for, which was not threats but bodies, friendly or not, fallen or about to fall. The first floor was empty except for 2 startled men who were on the ground and zip-tied within seconds. The stairwell was where things began to come apart. The trafficker had not been sleeping. He had been waiting. Whether someone had warned him, or whether he was simply careful, did not matter in the moment. What mattered was that as the lead stack rounded the landing between the 1st and 2nd floors, a burst of automatic fire came down from above, and Voss went backward into Aldrin. And Aldrin went backward into Claire, and the stairwell filled with the high copper smell of fresh blood. Voss had taken rounds through his left thigh and lower abdomen, just below the line of his plate carrier. He hit the concrete landing hard, and for 1 long second he did not make a sound, which was the sound she feared most. Then he cursed, and she knew he was still breathing, and she was already on her knees. The team kept fighting. That was the part civilians never understood about a stairwell ambush. You did not stop. You could not. Aldrin and Trent moved past her, returning fire upward, voices flat and clipped on the radio, calling out positions, calling for the rooftop element to push down. Reeve's voice came through her earpiece, calm as a tide, telling her the timeline and the casualty count and the route. She did not hear most of it. She had her gloved hands inside Voss's thigh, pressing down on a femoral bleed that was trying very hard to kill him in the next 90 seconds. He was white already. His lips were grey. His eyes were trying to find hers, and she found his first. She told him his name. She told him hers. She told him he was not going to die in this stairwell. Because she had not flown across an ocean and slept in a storage room and listened to him laugh at her on a gravel lot just to let him die in a stairwell. She said it without anger. She said it the way her father had said things to frightened animals. She got the tourniquet on. She packed the abdominal wound with hemostatic gauze and the flat of her hand. She kept talking. Above them, the firing slowed, then stopped. The trafficker was down. The hostage, it would turn out, was alive, in a back room on the 3rd floor, dehydrated but breathing. None of that mattered yet to Claire. What mattered was the man under her hands and the long carry down a dark stairwell to a vehicle that was not coming any closer than the end of the alley. They carried him out together. Aldrin took his shoulders. Trent, with a face she had never seen on him before, took his legs. Claire moved alongside, one hand pressed to the wound, the other holding an 4 bag she had spiked one-handed in the dark. The stairs were narrow. The blood made them slippery. Twice she almost went down, and twice Aldrin's free hand caught the back of her plate carrier without comment. The drive back to the compound was 41 minutes. She did not look at her watch once, but she would remember the number later because Reeve told her. 41 minutes in the back of a vehicle that smelled of copper and gun oil, with Voss drifting in and out of consciousness. With Trent holding the 4-bag above his head because there was nowhere to hang it, with Aldrin on the radio coordinating the medical handoff at the Partner Force aid station. Because their own surgical team was still 90 minutes out by air. She did not cry. She did not pray, exactly, although her lips moved sometimes around words her mother had taught her a long time ago. She kept pressure. She watched his pulse in the side of his neck. She talked to him. She told him about Montana. She told him about her father's hands. She told him, at one point, that he was not allowed to make her write a letter to anyone because she was tired and she had not slept and she did not have it in her tonight. He survived the drive. He survived the handoff. He survived the helicopter ride to the surgical team, and the surgery itself, and the long flight back to a hospital in Germany 3 days later. He would walk again. Not the way he had before, but he would walk, and that was, in the language of her trade, a victory she would not be permitted to celebrate out loud. She did not sleep when they got back to the compound. She cleaned her aid bag. She restocked her gauze. She washed Voss's blood off her gloves and her sleeves and the back of her neck, where it had somehow ended up. The sun was coming up by the time she was finished. The compound was very quiet. Sergeant Major Diallo brought her a cup of tea without saying anything and set it on the table beside her and walked away. She sat with the tea for a long time before she drank it. It was 3 days later, on the gravel apron of the airfield, before the laughter from Coronado came back to her, and even then, it came back changed. They were waiting to load out for the long flight home. The team stood in a loose half-circle in the dawnlight, their gear stacked, their faces drawn in the way faces get drawn after something that almost went wrong and didn't. Voss was not there. Voss was already in Germany. But Aldrin was there, and Trent was there, and most of Bravo Element was there, and so was Master Chief Reeve. She did not see him approach. She was checking the tag on her duffel, head down. She only realized he was standing in front of her when his shadow fell across her hands. She looked up. Reeve did not speak. He simply raised his right hand, slowly, deliberately, the way a man raises a hand when he wants every person on a flight line to see what he is doing, and he held a salute. To her. A Master Chief, 26 years in, the senior enlisted of a SEAL platoon, holding a salute to a corpsman who was not an officer, who did not technically rate one. Who was standing in a sweat-stained uniform on a gravel apron in a country she was not supposed to talk about. It was not regulation. It was something older than regulation. It was the oldest thing in their world. It was acknowledgement. The other men saw it. Every one of them. And one by one, without a word, they came to attention and raised their own. She did not know what to do with her hands. She returned the salute, because that was what you did. But her eyes, for the first time in 3 days, were not entirely dry. The story might have ended there, on that gravel apron, in that grey light. But stories about people like Claire Hollister rarely end at the moment everyone else thinks they should. There is always the part that comes after. The flight home was long. She slept for most of it, the deep dreamless sleep of a body that has been holding itself together for too many days. When they landed, there was no parade. There never is. There was a quiet debrief, a longer one with the medical command, paperwork that took most of a week. And a phone call to her father in Montana that she could not quite get all the way through without putting the phone down twice. Her father did not ask for details. He never did. He asked if she was eating. He asked if her hands were steady. She said yes to both, and he said good, and that was the conversation. After they hung up, she sat at the small kitchen table in her base housing and looked at her hands for a long time and decided that yes, in fact, they were. Word about what had happened in that stairwell traveled the way these things travel in the special operations community, which is to say quietly, without names. And faster than anyone outside the community would believe. By the time she reported back to her unit, men who had never spoken to her before were nodding at her in hallways. A young corpsman in her first workup, a woman named Reyes, asked if Claire would mentor her, and Claire said yes before Reyes had finished the question. Voss came back 6 months later. He walked with a cane. He found her in the chow hall on a Tuesday, and he sat down across from her without asking, and he did not apologize, because that was not how men like him apologized. Instead he said, very quietly, that his daughter, who was 4, had asked him at his bedside in Germany who had saved his life, and he had told her, and his daughter had drawn Claire a picture. He had carried it folded in his wallet for 6 months. He gave it to her across the chow hall table. It was a stick figure with yellow hair and a red cross on her chest. Above it, in careful uneven letters, were the words "Thank you for my dad." Claire put it in the front pocket of her notebook. It stayed there for the rest of her career. She deployed 3 more times after that. She trained dozens of younger corpsmen, men and women both. She was selected for assignments that, when she had first enlisted, she had been told women would never see. She did not always succeed. There were missions that went wrong, men she could not save, nights she sat alone with the weight of names she would not say out loud. She wore those losses the way her father had worn his, quietly, without performance, as part of the cost of the work. She never spoke publicly about the stairwell. She never told the story at reunions. When younger sailors asked her what had changed the team's mind about her, she would shrug and say it had not been one thing. It had been showing up. Every day. With clean hands and a checked bag and a refusal to be anything other than what she was. But sometimes, late, when she was alone in her quarters before a deployment, she would take out the folded drawing and look at it. And she would think about a Master Chief standing in dawnlight on a gravel apron, raising his hand to her in front of his men. And she would remember, very clearly, that she had earned it twice. Once in the stairwell. And once, long before that, in every silent morning she had refused to walk away. There is a particular kind of courage that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with music. It does not stand on a hilltop and speak in slogans. It shows up before dawn in a clean uniform with a checked bag, it absorbs the laughter of men who do not yet understand what they are looking at, and it goes to work. That was the kind of courage Claire Hollister carried, and it is the kind of courage this story was always about. She was not a superhero. She was not unbreakable. She was a woman from a small town in Montana, raised by a quiet father and a mother she lost too soon. Who learned early that the world does not hand respect to people who look like her in the places she wanted to serve. She learned that respect had to be earned in silence, over years. In the small consistent acts of competence that no one notices until the night they need you and you are already kneeling in the dark with your hands inside the wound. What changed that morning on the gravel apron in West Africa was not Claire. Claire had always been Claire. What changed was the room around her. The men who had laughed on a parking lot in Coronado finally saw what had been standing in front of them the whole time. And one of them, the most senior of them, did the only thing he knew how to do that could honor it properly. He raised his hand. And the others followed. That salute did not make her career. Her career was made long before. In 17 times she had been told no and had not argued. It was made in 2 deployments with a Marine infantry unit. In the long nights of a corpsman pipeline she was told she would not finish. In the partner force soldiers she treated without being asked. In the tourniquet she got on Voss's leg in 90 seconds because she had practiced it 10,000 times when no one was watching. The salute simply told the truth out loud. If there is a lesson in her story, it is not that women belong in uniform, although they do. It is not that everyone who is underestimated will be vindicated, because many will not be, and that is part of the cost. The lesson is quieter than that, and harder. It is that the work is the answer. It is always the work. Show up. Check the bag. Learn the names. Keep your hand steady. Do not argue with people who are not really asking questions. Let the night you are needed find you ready. Somewhere right now, in a quiet barracks before dawn, a young woman is lacing her boots and being told, in 100 small ways, that she does not belong. If you are her, or if you know her, remember Claire Hollister in the stairwell, and remember the Master Chief in the dawn light. And remember that the people who change everything are almost never the people the room expected. They are the ones who simply refuse to leave.